Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to this new Justice and Beyond Forum on providing reports and updates on the current reparations movement here in the United States, but also in various other parts of the world. I just returned on Saturday from a meeting in Evanston, a symposium in Evanston, Illinois, on local reparations campaigns and activities. There were up to 100 leaders invited to participate in this forum. They came. I have the program here with their faces and listed, and they were Asheville, North Carolina, Newark, New Jersey, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there were up to and many other cities were represented in Evanston. And Evanston, of course, is important because it is where the first successful reparations campaign has been mounted, and where the City of Evanston has created a reparations commission that has provided, that developed a reparations call, decided that the reparations that they would specifically provide African Americans would be on the basis of discrimination that African Americans received in Evanston if they were at one time seeking to purchase a home, because they were victimized by all kinds of redlining and other discrimination in Evanston. And the city council in Evanston documented this. They published reports, which I have reviewed. I can, of course, send you information on that. And the initial amount that the city council in Evanston granted for reparations was $10 million that they set aside from based on the taxes from the sale of cannabis in the city. And it was announced at the meeting that the city council had authorized a second $10 million for the Reparations Commission in Evanston to distribute, to identify individuals who were discriminated against, and to distribute another $10 million. So it's $20 million that the Evanston City Council has authorized for reparations payments to African-American residents who were victimized by discrimination in the housing market. And so we are going to talk about the background to the civil rights around reparations payments. And we're going to have two experts discuss their particular entry into the discussion of reparations for African Americans in the United States and throughout the world. In the case of Professor Robert Wesley, he is a professor of law at Tulane University and is completing a book on reparations and has published articles on reparations in various venues. And we'll also hear from Mickey Dean, Mr. Mickey Dean, who was in Evanston. We had a great time in Evanston. Mickey Dean was there representing the Kansas City Reparations Initiative that he is heading up as a member of NCOBRA. And so at the end, we will talk about what happened, our thoughts about what happened at the symposium this weekend in Evanston. But first, we're going to begin with Professor Wesley, who is a professor of law at Tulane Law School, who is a graduate of Yale Law School, and UC Berkeley, Northwestern University. And he's completing a book on reparations. And so the way that we will do this, we will have Professor Wesley first, and then Mickey Dean from the Kansas City Reparations Initiative, to provide an overview, background on their entry into the larger reparations movement and then their work in this area. And then we will begin with Professor Wesley, and then we'll follow by Mickey Dean, and then we will take questions. We'll take questions in the chat. You can put questions in the chat, and we will address them. Okay, so why don't we begin with Professor Wesley, who will unmute himself and just provide us some information on how he entered and his work developed on the national and international reparations movement. Professor Wesley.
Thank you so much, VP. I'm so happy to be able to join. I hope my audio is working and everyone can hear me. Again, thanks very much for inviting me to take part in this forum. This is my first opportunity to take part, and I'm very excited about being here this evening. I just wanted to correct one small little thing about my intro, which is that I did attend Yale, but not Yale Law School. I got my PhD in philosophy from Yale, but I actually went to UC Berkeley Law School. And I currently am teaching law at Tulane Law School. I teach courses in legal ethics and constitutional law and a number of other very controversial topics. So I was asked to talk a little bit about my my research. I'm sorry. I was asked to talk a little bit about my research and my upcoming publication on reparations, which I'm still in search of a title, even though most of the manuscript is complete. I have about one more chapter to write before it's complete. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will be ready for publication sometime at the end of next year. This project for me really kind of got off the ground at the point where I was observing with the contemporary claims for reparations that were being pursued in US courts, that these claims were being dismissed by those courts, sometimes based on statute of limitations. Sometimes judges would invoke the notion of standing. They would say that the contemporary African Americans had no standing to bring these types of claims. These are claims that should have been brought by their ancestors back during slavery, I suppose. And of course, where the defendant was the government, you actually have to get permission from the government to sue the government. So they have sovereign immunity. So looking at these sort of procedural blockages to actually pursuing reparations litigation, some people concluded, well, what we need to do is stop focusing so much on slavery and focus on Jim Crow, because at least with Jim Crow, we have contemporary living persons who experience Jim Crow segregation and discrimination. But I think very quickly, folks who were involved in the Tulsa riot litigation found out that that really wasn't the reason that these types of claims were being denied, because they were not very successful in getting reparations in Tulsa, and still have not been, unfortunately, in Tulsa. So I took the challenge to sort of go back, even though I'm not a historian, I'm a philosopher and a lawyer. I took the challenge to go back into history and look at what the history was telling us about reparations claims that might have been brought during slavery. And to my surprise, there were hundreds and hundreds of cases in the archives of people who claimed that they had been wrongfully enslaved. I'm sure some of you may have seen the film or read the book, 12 Years a Slave, about the life of Solomon Northup. Well, while I was working on my manuscript, I came across a copy of the Solomon Northup text, and I was very intrigued. This is what I found. I just want to share a little bit from the first chapter. I say, towards the end of Solomon Northup's autobiographical account of his wrongful enslavement, the reader learns that he sought to bring to justice the men who had robbed him of his freedom by selling him into slavery. Although one of the men charged with his kidnapping and sale was allowed to testify falsely, Northup was not allowed to offer any testimony on his own behalf, solely on the ground of his race. Northup's attempt to obtain justice for himself through the legal process available was eventually turned aside without punishment for the offender nor any restitution for his losses due to his 12 years of wrongful enslavement. Sadly, Northup's experience is emblematic of American slavery and its system of justice, which persists long after the abolition of racial slavery, to deny any restitution is owed to those who were wrongfully enslaved or their natural heirs, contemporary African Americans. Although we celebrate today the abolition of slavery and proclaim the equality of all persons before the law, regardless of race or color, the restitution claims of the wrongfully enslaved received no fair hearing before the law than occurred during Northup's lifetime, when the institution of slavery was considered legal and racial subordination of persons of African descent was accepted as part of the natural order of civil society. This chapter is about examination of the historical premise that there was a time for redress of slavery's harms in the American justice system, but that time has come and gone. So that was my starting point, was to sort of go back and say, well, let's look at what things were like when statute of limitations didn't apply, when standing was not an issue because you had the actually enslaved person and that person who actually enslaved them before the court, and there were no questions of sovereign immunity. And what I found, as I said, was that there were many, many cases, hundreds of cases, in fact, of people who claimed on various grounds that they had been wrongfully enslaved. Not that slavery was wrong, but that they had been wrongfully enslaved. And what I found was that even in cases where courts found that people were correct, that they had been wrongfully enslaved for one reason or another, the courts nevertheless, almost uniformly, there were some exceptions, but almost uniformly, the courts would deny restitution to these people. It was almost assumed that if you got your freedom, that was the only thing that you deserved. You didn't deserve restitution for what happened to you. And there was actually a legal doctrine that that was called at the time the doctrine of the master's good faith. So if the person who enslaved you could show that they enslaved that person in good faith, according to the court, then they were not required to pay restitution. And thus that was the title of my my article, which I'm using as my first chapter in the book. The title of the article is Restitution Claims for Wrongful Enslavement and the Doctrine of the Master's Good Faith. And that's really kind of my starting point, was just sort of look at this historically. And but I also, in the text of the book, I want to look at the issue of reparations, not only historically but comparatively, because we really get this language of reparations from the experience of the Jews after World War II in West Germany in particular. And so I wanted to look at what that experience was like and to see what can we as African Americans seeking restitution and reparations for slavery and Jim Crow, what could we learn from the experience of the Jewish people in West Germany in particular? And not only West Germany, but I also wanted to look at East Germany, because there are actually differences. West Germany paid Holocaust reparations to the Jews. East Germany never did. And the story of the difference between the two societies, I think, has a lot to teach us as Americans about how people have dealt with this issue of restitution for state atrocities and state-sponsored violence. So I just, in fact, I actually recently wrote a short essay that's called "What Every Law Student Needs to Know About Reparations," that talks a little bit about that experience. And I wanted to share just a tiny bit. I won't read the entire thing, but I just wanted to share a little bit of that as well with you this evening. Prior to the Second World War, the term reparations only referred to indemnities that countries defeated in war were forced to pay to victorious countries. The usage changed when West Germany agreed, in effect, to pay reparations to civil society victims of the Holocaust. In some contexts, the term still implies a measure of forced indemnity extracted by victors in war from losers. However, since the beginning of West German Wiedergutmachung, which literally translates as make good again, reparations have come to include material compensation paid to civil society victims of state-sponsored injustices. This kind of reparations also includes symbolic gestures aimed at acknowledgement of wrongdoing, reconciliation, and restoration of peaceful relations among civil society groups. The problem with reparations, when it's understood as material compensation paid to civil society victims of state-sponsored injustices, is that not all victims who have suffered these types of injustices have received reparations. Even West German Wiedergutmachung did not include reparations to certain groups who were victimized alongside the primarily Jewish victims of the Holocaust, such as the Roma people, sexual minorities, or political prisoners. Not until after reunification of the two Germanys did reparations include compensation to foreigners whom the Nazi regime had used as forced workers. Moreover, Germany has yet to pay reparations for the near genocide of the Herero people that occurred during the country's colonial occupation of Namibia during the early years of the 21st century. which is sometimes referred to as the first genocide of the 20th century. Nevertheless, using the German model of Holocaust reparations, other groups across the globe have sought reparations for more recent injustices, as well as for historical injustices with varying degrees of success. Victims of apartheid in South Africa, for example, sought and obtained partial reparations as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process, which pioneered an alternative model of restorative justice based on an exchange of truthful testimony about atrocities in return for amnesty for perpetrators. As its title indicates, South African TRC process was more focused on racial reconciliation, believed to be essential to the establishment of a democratic political system, rather than material compensation to victims of apartheid. In the United States, there is an increasing number of cases in which states and localities have attempted small-scale reparations. So VP has talked about the case of Evanston, and I'm sure Mr. Mickey Dean will talk more about the Evanston example. What I say is about these sort of small-scale attempts is that these reparations to survivors of police torture and abuse in Chicago, reparations to victims of forced sterilizations in North Carolina, and reparations to survivors of a racist massacre in the hamlet of Rosewood, Florida, are some examples as well of what I call small-scale reparations. More recently, since the slaughter of worshipers inside the Mother Emanuel African Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, there has been a movement across the former Confederacy to remove Confederate iconography from public places of honor. On a larger scale, the United States federal government has paid reparations to Japanese Americans for interning them and violating their civil rights during the Second World War, to Native Americans to compensate them for the federal government's seizure of their tribal lands, and to Black farmers who suffered racial discrimination as part of the Department of the Agriculture policies. A common thread, I would argue, that runs through these examples is the targeting of victims based on their presumed difference from the perpetrators, whether the difference is thought of as racial or ethnic or biological. Unifying each of these examples as instances of reparations, moreover, as opposed to ordinary civil justice, are other factors, including the inability of victims to obtain ordinary justice at the time that the violations occurred, the role of government in sanctioning or at least not prohibiting the actions that took place, and acceptance by the party making reparations of some version of what I call entity liability. Entity liability refers to a moral and political concept of accountability based on a relationship of privilege. In any large association with a complex structure, such as a corporation, city, or nation state, the entity represented by the cooperative efforts of its members is conceptualized as distinct from its members. Privilege resides in the fact that those who benefit by reason of their association may exercise their power as members to exclude non-members from these benefits. In exchange, however, society holds current members to account for debts incurred on behalf of the association by previous members in a succession that can last as long as the entity is permitted to survive. Thus, even when current members are not personally liable for actions that other members may have taken long ago on behalf of the association, entity liability ensures that the association will remain accountable. On the other hand, acceptance of entity liability tells us nothing about who should benefit from reparations or what should be included in reparations. And so I treat those issues as separate issues in this particular essay. Um, and everything about reparations is controversial. So I was aware of that from the beginning of my uh, my writings about reparations, so that I was dealing with a controversial topic, then that people would have lots and lots of questions. Who should get reparations? Who should pay reparations? Should we go after individuals or who whose families have benefited, but they may not have still benefited from those prior acts? Is it strictly something that should be focused against the government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I've been
Right. And we're gonna
a long
pursue some
time.
of those. We're gonna pursue some of those this evening, because what you have clarified for us is that there is this the reparations demands coming from individuals that can be traced back to slavery, but also communities, groups, and particular ethnic groups, et cetera. And one of the differences in the movement today is those who think that individuals should be the recipients of reparations payments if they were hurt by a local government or an institution, as opposed to those who say that it should be collective, a collective response, because they were laws, et cetera, that affected African Americans as a group. And I think that leads right into the work of Mickey Dean and in Cobra in Kansas City, because in Kansas City, this is a movement that is looking for reparations for a collective, for a group, and that's in contrast to these various campaigns that focus primarily on individuals, et cetera. So, Mickey Dean, could you tell us about the collective nature of the reparations initiative that they have in Kansas City?
Yes, and thank you, VP. And let me just say to Professor Wesley, after listening to you, I'm looking forward to your book, and so make sure you make it known when it's out, because there are a lot of interesting issues, like you say. There's a lot of controversy, particularly on the legal front, with regard to reparations. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to talk about our effort in Kansas City, and I think in my discussions with VP over the weekend, where you are maybe thinking about pursuing a local reparations initiative, and I just want to share some of our experiences. I also want to acknowledge Janae Relaford. Raise your hand, Janae. Janae is from Kansas City. She was there in Evanston with us. Let me just tell you a little bit, and let me VP made it clear that I had 15 minutes, so I'm gonna start my clock, and if I start going over, you just cut me off. But let me just say a little bit. I'm not. I think in what I read, VP said I was a founding member of NCOBRA. I'm a member of NCOBRA, but I'm not a founding member. I am a founding member of the Kansas City chapter of the National Black United Front. And one of the things that I want to say is that NBUF was founded in 1980, the convention in Brooklyn, New York. And one of our principles of unity was support for Black reparations. So we're talking over 40 years, at least from our organization, that we have been supporting reparations, although not during that time, sometimes not actively, but that's something that's been on our radar for a number of years. And early on, when we would talk to people about reparations, first of all, a lot of people didn't know what we were talking about. Others would give us the side eye, like, yeah, we agree with you, but that'll never happen. And there just wasn't much movement on the reparations front, even after NCOBRA started, and I believe they started in 1989. But a couple of things happened. You all may remember in 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in the Atlantic magazine. If you haven't read that article, I would suggest you go back and read it. And it's called The Case for Reparations. And what that article did was it really brought this issue of reparations back to the forefront. And now a lot of people were beginning to discuss reparations. Even though he wasn't an expert on reparations, he had done some tremendous research into the housing situation in Chicago that established the case for reparations. The other thing that happened is that you may recall in the 2020 Democratic primary, you had candidates that were actually talking about HR 40 and reparations.
Yes.
So now this is a mainstream issue now, this issue of reparations. And of course, a main catalyst was the George Floyd incident. And that was a catalyst to a lot of so-called racial reconciliation, because this was really brought home to the country in terms of what was happening to Black people. And there were some other things, but those are some things that really got the discussion about reparations going again, and sort of brought it to the forefront. National Black United Front, as I said, we've always had a position on reparations, but as this issue began to come to the forefront, we felt that on the one hand, we needed to involve more people in the reparations movement, and that we needed a broader coalition, okay? At the time, we weren't sure exactly what our objective was, but we knew that we wanted to have some discussion about reparations in Kansas City. So we formed what was called the KC Reparations Coalition. And it was made up of 9 organizations: our organization, NAACP, Sankofa for Kansas City, a group called Real Justice Network, the Urban League, SCLC, Muhammad's Mosque number 30, and Urban Summit. So we all came together and formed the KC Reparations Coalition. At that time, we began to hear about other local efforts on reparations, and in particular, the Evanston situation. And once we became aware of a lot of the other local efforts, we started making contact with some other cities around the country to try to see exactly what were they doing. One of the things that was happening was that they were patterning their efforts after HR 40. HR 40 is the legislation in Congress that is to establish a commission to study reparations. The initial HR 40 was to study whether or not Black folks deserve reparations, but that was changed, I think, in 2017, and it went from a study bill to a proposal to study. Actually, they felt that enough work had been done. Black people deserve reparations, but now the question was, what form should it take? So that was to be done through the establishment of a commission. So what we noticed was that a lot of local cities were establishing reparations commissions, and we felt that we would establish a commission here. And this commission would study local issues in terms of oppression and disinvestment, and what the city of Kansas City and Kansas City government, Kansas City corporations, Kansas City institutions, what did they do to oppress and disinvest in the Black community, and to try to seek some reparatory justice from them. Like a lot of the other cities, we settled on 5 injury areas. Ours was homeownership, affordable housing, healthcare, business economic development, criminal justice, and education. And this was consistent with not only the injury areas nationally, but also in some of the other cities. And so we began to then set about trying to establish a reparations coalition. Now, in the meantime, HR 40 was finally beginning to make progress. As you may recall, it was passed out of the Judiciary Committee for the first time last spring, and was right to be sent to Congress for a vote. But of course, Democratic politics got in the way. Pelosi and Clyburn and some of the other leadership didn't want to bring it to the floor because they were afraid that it would interfere with what they were trying to do in the midterms, because they felt they were going to suffer a loss in the midterms, and they didn't want this issue out there. But at any rate, one of the things that we did that would help our movement was that we went to our city council and asked them to pass a resolution in favor of HR 40. And we were fortunate to have a city council person that led that effort. And in fact, we had a resolution passed unanimously by our city council in support of HR 40. So that gave us some impetus. But we knew that we needed to do a lot of work in Kansas City in order to cultivate interest in reparations, because keep in mind that there's a lot, even today, there's a lot of misunderstanding about exactly what reparations are, what they are not. And so we set about trying to clarify that. And I will say that if you're intending on doing a local reparations initiative, you want to make sure you get someone in your legislative body to be to be the person that's going to really guide this through, because that's going to be necessary to have somebody in your legislative body that's really strongly tied to this movement, and that's going to really fight to get it pushed through. So what we did was we developed an education campaign. We developed a PowerPoint presentation. We developed flyers. We would go to meetings wherever we had a chance to say something about reparations. We did a public forum, but the idea was to try to educate the community about reparations and what reparatory justice looked like in all of its forms. And so we did that. Now, we wanted to know where our mayor was on the issue. Just so you know, we have a Black mayor in Kansas City. I had heard him do a radio interview where somebody asked him about reparations, and I mean, he did such an excellent job of talking in circles and saying nothing that I was really concerned about whether or not he would support us. But what happened was that we were out doing some leafleting at Juneteenth. We celebrate Juneteenth every year here in Kansas City. And the mayor was in the little Juneteenth parade, and I saw him and I handed him a flyer. And the mayor told me, he said, "Oh, I'm on this, you know." Now, I had heard the mayor say one word about reparations. I had no idea what he was talking about. But about a week later, I heard about this group called Mayors Organized for Reparations and Equity. MORE is the acronym. And if you get a chance, go to their website. I think it's more.org. But they made some very, very, very strong statements in support of reparations. And one of the things that they said that these mayors pledged to do was to establish a commission to study reparations. Lo and behold, our mayor, Quentin Lucas, when we looked at it, he was one of the mayors that had signed up. Now, we had no idea. The mayor knew we had a coalition. He had said nothing to us about it. We had no idea. And so we were a bit surprised when we saw his name on there. So what we did was we said that the mayor has signed on to MORE. He has basically pledged that he is going to support local reparations. He's going to establish a commission. So let's get him in a meeting to see exactly what his plans are. So we called a meeting with the mayor. And the first thing we found out is that the mayor had no clue about what he was doing. As a matter of fact, to this day, I'm not sure why he signed it. And I have some ideas because he was in some trouble with some members of the Black community. And I think this may have been a statement that he was trying to make. But it was clear that he had no plan on what he intended to do to set this commission up. So as a coalition, we took it upon ourselves. We said, we're going to set the agenda for you, and we're going to do this work. So what we've done in the meantime, and let me just take my time here. Okay, what we've done in the meantime is we've tried to lay the groundwork to get this commission done. We did two things. One was we drafted an ordinance, a city ordinance that will call for a mayor's commission on reparations. We did the drafting. And the second thing we did was we did a survey to see who would be interested in serving as a commissioner once we got the commission established. So we got very good response in our survey. There are a lot of people in Kansas City, and a lot of it is due to our work in addition to what was happening nationally. There are a lot of people who are interested in reparations and who really want to participate in this effort. And so we think that we have a group of people that's ready to do something about reparations. Now, we still have some issues to resolve with the mayor because the mayor, in the year and a half time from the time that he signed on to MORE, has done absolutely nothing to really push this effort forward. I mean, we've had to drag him and push him every step of the way. And in fact, it was almost like he was trying to walk back his commitment. One of the things that happened though was that the Kansas City Star, which is the main newspaper in Kansas City, they came out with an editorial in favor of establishing this commission. The Kansas City Star has a lot of influence in town, and I don't know that we were surprised by it because they did talk to us, but they came out with a very strong editorial in favor of the commission, and that kind of got the mayor going, and so now he's beginning to move forward on reparations. There are some issues we have with him about the size of the commission, about compensation of commissioners, about staffing the commission, because there's no point in having a commission if you don't have a staff, because there's a lot of work to be done, there's a lot of research to be done, and of course, the proposal has to be prepared and written. So we're going to need staff. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting with the mayor's staff this evening after we get done with this. So we've got it.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we scheduled it so that we would have time to do this. We've got about 35 local organizations that have signed on in support of this ordinance. We have a hearing on the 13th, a committee hearings. The way it works here is that the ordinance is heard in committee, and if it's passed out of committee, it goes to the full council. We think we have the votes to pass this. We have a city manager form of government, so the mayor just has one vote on the council. We have a 12-person council along with the mayor, so we need 7 votes. We know we have 5 for sure. And so all we got to do is work a couple of votes, and then we'll have the commission in place. Hopefully, nothing goes wrong between now and then. I won't be convinced, because I still have some concerns about the mayor, but he seems to be on board, and that's something that we'll find out. So again, if you're planning on doing this in your city, it's important to, one, have strong support from at least 1 or 2 legislators that's going to guide this through. It's very important to educate the public, because I don't know, the makeup of the politics in your area, and whether or not your legislative body will be in support of reparations or not. But the more work that you can do in the community, the better you'll be, because they'll be the ones that'll put pressure on their legislature. We know we have some people on our council that are totally opposed to it. They've already indicated as such, but we think we can get the votes to do it. And if we can get the votes, if we can get the staffing, if we can get the support, we think that we'll have a good report. We've given ourselves 12 months to have an initial report, and then 18 months to have a final report. Now, we understand that municipalities can only do so much when it comes to reparatory justice. We can't expect municipalities to do what the federal government is expected to do under HR 40, but we think that there are some things, and not only are we going after the city government, but we know that there are local corporations in Kansas City that historically have been responsible for the disinvestment in our community in terms of redlining. Just like every other city, there's a freeway that came right down the heart of the Black community, and we know that was a federal project, but city officials had a lot to say about where that highway went. I mean, there's just so many other issues. The dual education system that has hampered our people, the disinvestment or lack of economic investment in the Black community. So a lot of these things were caused by local institutions, local corporations, and local government. So we think that they owe us also. And one of the things that the commission will determine is, in terms of reparatory justice, which of these entities, we will try to extract some justice from, and we'll go from there. So that's where we are in Kansas City. We started our coalition back in November 2020, so we're 2 years into this, and we made a lot of progress. But even if we get this commission established, then the real work will begin. So that's where we are in Kansas City. And I appreciate having this opportunity to just say what we've been doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. That's really, really helpful for us in New Orleans, because we have been holding town hall meetings beginning in 2017 to educate the community about the need for a reparations task force here. We have had numerous forums on justice and beyond, and we are. And one of the things that's interesting is that when we looked it up, and contacted her office. We believe that LaToya Cantrell is also a member of MORE. But as far as I know, she has never raised the issue of reparations. She has been invited to the town hall meetings that we have, and we also invited all of the city council members, and it was the case that the councilman from New Orleans East, Oliver Thomas, was present, and he has discussed the issue of reparations on his radio program. He has a radio program, and I have been on his radio program to discuss the issue of reparations, but I don't think that he's been asked to support a particular ordinance. I think that may be our next step. But in terms of the specific goals, now you mentioned the negative impact, and I'm talking about in Kansas City, of the highway construction in Kansas City that led to the removal of the homes or it went through the Black community, changing the Black community, had a negative effect on the Black community there. I think that was also the case here in New Orleans. So is that the specific housing issue that you would be seeking reparations for in there? What would be another, specific? For example, just give you an example. We have a problem with gun violence in New Orleans, and so we would want our reparations a reparations program to deal with restorative justice. We need restorative justice for the people who are hurt by the gun violence that occur and those who perpetrate the gun violence. And so in Kansas City, is it at the thrust of the housing emphasis for demands for reparations?
Well, the urban renewal or Negro removal, or however you want to put it, it dealt not only with housing, but it also destroyed a good part of our business community. And so that particular one is tied to both housing and economic development. Also, there's a developer here. His name is J.C. Nichols. J.C. Nichols was not only really important in Kansas City real estate, but he was at one point head of the national, I can't think of the exact name of it, but he was one of the architects of redlining. And his idea of redlining, because of his position on this national real estate board, was something that spread throughout. And so that's a big issue here. Education, of course, we're looking at the educational institutions. We had two separate healthcare systems, and of course ours was deficient. So when we talk about reparatory justice, we're going to be looking at something in all of those areas, including criminal justice, and particularly, we just like everywhere else, we got a lot of sisters and brothers locked up here over weed charges. These charges that folks are just making money off of now. We want to get rid of cash bail. I mean, there's just a number of issues in terms of reparatory justice in each one of those areas, because we're trying to emphasize that, a lot of people still think when they think reparations, they think about a check. And of course, direct payment is part of it. I don't know to what extent that can be done at the municipal level, but at any rate, we've looked at, because that's one of the questions we get. What are y'all talking about when y'all say reparations if it's not a check? And there are just so many other, we could talk about free education, higher education. I mean, there's just so many things. We have a lot of vacant land here in Kansas City. We could talk about vacant land, money to develop, that land in terms of homes, business, whatever. So there are a wide range of things that we can look at when we start talking about reparatory justice.
Yeah. Yes, and the important in Louisiana, you may have heard about the GU 272 group, who were the descendants of those enslaved Africans who were sold by Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. to and ended up here in southwestern Louisiana, and the creation of an organization that is trying to that is making specific reparations demands for from Georgetown University, and that's an institution. That's one institution. But the identifying specific institutions, there's the government, you know, at the municipal, you know, the state and the federal level, but there are also the institutions that have done great damage to African Americans historically, and should be involved in some kind of repair. Professor Wesley, do you think that institutions such as institutions of higher education that may have benefited from slavery and slave trading and from the removal of people of African descent from particular areas in order for that institution to expand, and so that there's a history of institutions, you know, removing African Americans and from particular areas and stuff, and not compensating them. Of course, the most egregious example of this is, of course, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where you had the entire community attacked and burned down with the support of the local government. Professor Wesley, you think that is that strategy? Do you think we'll have any degree of success in New Orleans or in Louisiana?
I think we may have lost him.
Oh.
When you mentioned his name, I started looking to see him. I couldn't find him anymore.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll call him.
Do you have his number?
Yeah, I have his telephone number, and I'll call him. That we lost. I'll let him know that we lost him. Okay, what are the institutions in Kansas City that you could target if for reparations on the basis of damage that they may have done to the community? Because we probably have the same institutions in New Orleans.
Yeah, one of the things that we have in our ordinance is that in addition to city government, we want to encourage corporations and other institutions to examine their role in the disinvestment and oppression of the Black community. And we want the mayor to use his bully pulpit to try to help convince some of these companies, because remember, after this George Floyd thing, I mean, they sort of opened up their pocketbooks. I mean, they started spreading money everywhere. Of course, the intent, I think, was to try to blunt the radical side of the movement, you know, but at the same time, we think that they may be amenable to some type of reparatory justice. I mean, we don't know, but the key is going to be documentation. That's one of the things that we heard in Evanston, that you have to document, I mean, very precisely the historical harm that is taking place, no matter whether you're talking about criminal justice or economic development, healthcare, education. If you want to tie these institutions in, you have to be able to document and go back in history and present to them specifically what they have done to harm Black people, and to the extent possible, how they have benefited, you know, from what they have done to help disenfranchise Black people. Fortunately, a lot of that research in most cities has been done. It's just a matter of trying to pull it together. We had a company that came here in Kansas City about 3 years ago and just mapped out the redlining, historical redlining in Kansas City. And we have a street called Truth, and it's historically has been the dividing line between black and white. And they were able to demonstrate the property value of an acre east of Truth where we live versus west of Truth where other people live, and it's very stark. So the thing is that it's that type of data that you're going to have, and again, that was emphasized in the meetings in Evanston this weekend. You're going to have that type of data in order to make a case. You can't come with a general argument that you all discriminated against us. You know, how specifically did they discriminate against us? And so yeah, we think that we can make a case with healthcare institutions, with educational institutions. There's a local college, William Jewell, where some students have done some historical research and found that William Jewell, who the college was named after, owned enslaved Africans, as well as the founders of the school. So that type of research is the kind of research that we're going to have to get done. And that's why the staffing is important to get that done. But we're going to have to make a very specific case for reparatory justice.
All right, thank you. All right, so questions for Mickey Dean from NCOBRA, unless Janae Rayford, unless she wants to add something before we can open it up for questions. You could just use the reactions with your for a question like that. You can raise it up, and it looks like Valerie Davenport is going to be taking over the questioning answer. But first, we'll see if Janae Rayford from Kansas City wants to add anything to what Mickey Dean has said.
I was just going to add, just making sure that everyone stands on what is right to ask for, because as Mickey Dean, Brother Mickey shared, our mayor, him and his assistant is as if they are tiptoeing around the issue of reparations. You know, it's certain things that when we first started meeting with them, they wanted to change the language of an apology. And it was like, at first they were telling us, well, they were doing some work related to reparations, but they weren't using the term reparations, which really wasn't true. You know, they said they was doing some programming in Black neighborhoods, but that doesn't define reparations. So we had to go back and forth with them a little bit on exactly what reparations is. So I just encourage everyone to make sure that they are standing on exactly what is needed, and making sure that we do get the apologies that are warranted, and we don't take less than what we need for the repair. So that's what I wanted to add.
All right.
And I also might add, VP, that I think you are a commissioner with the National African Reparations Commission, right?
Yes.
And so we think that, and they have a great website, and COBRA has a great website, and it's important to make use of these organizations that have already done a lot of work, and they can provide some guidance in addition to, like I said, the importance of the meeting this weekend was getting a chance to talk to people from other cities, some more advanced than us, some who are not as far as we are, but to just learn. So you won't be alone. If you decide to do this initiative, you won't be alone. There are a lot of people in the country doing it, and they're more than willing to help. And of course, you've got Brother VP here, who's a commissioner with a great group. And so I just want to make sure we make use of those people.
And Baba, Mickey, someone asked in the chat if we were working with the Equal Justice Initiative for our documentation, which I don't want to misspeak, but I don't think that we are. A lot of the individuals on our coalition, we came together to add a lot of the knowledge or data that we use for our injury areas. And I did want to note that was another thing we went back and forth with the mayor's office on. We gave, kind of general national data on the repair and the injury areas, but they wanted us to be more specific to Kansas City. which that is what we are working through now, because the mayor is wanting the ordinance to be a historical document in itself. So like an educational piece for the public, he's wanting that in the ordinance. So that's kind of what we are fleshing out now, with our ordinance, creating a historical document, basically.
Well, yes, that's what, well, one of the things, we have a lot of scholars and historians and sociologists in who are in New Orleans or who study New Orleans, and it's actually one of the cities, Black communities, that's most studied in the world, and so that the evidence has been piling up. It's just in terms of New Orleans, and but we just haven't put it together to form an ordinance. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Valerie Jefferson, and she's going to take care of the questions coming from those who are in attendance. Valerie.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Franklin. We do appreciate Mr. McAdeen and Ms. Relaford. If I'm pronouncing your name right?
Relaford.
Relaford. We do thank you for your information that you have shared with us. Hopefully that we can move forward, and we thank you for your hard work and your research. We do have, notice we do have 2 questions. We got one from Miss Lane. I want to say Miss Relaford addressed that. Miss Lane, thank you. And then we have a question from Mr. Raymond. Mr. Raymond, do you want to speak your question, or you want me to read it? Mr.
Sure,
Raymond. Okay.
I'll ask. This is very simple. I was just wondering, Janae, did you guys find information specific to KCMO, and where did you find it at?
Yes, we did, Raymond. We have a lot of data, and we found that data through individuals on our coalition who had already been doing a lot of work in this area over the years. A lot of the information is readily available online. So there had already been a lot of historical data that we just pulled from various sources.
And I might add that there are a couple of people that have written books on the history of racism in Kansas City that's been helpful. That's given us an historical perspective. Also, you may be familiar with the Urban League State of Black America. We have a local Urban League. They do a State of Black Kansas City every year. And so they talk about what's happening in the Black community in different areas. We're going to be making use of some folks at the university, the local university here. So like Janae said, a lot of this work has been done already. It's just a matter of us pulling it together. And as she mentioned, the mayor is concerned about, I think, getting some of the white council people to vote for this. And I think that's why he really wants to focus on making sure that we tie these harms and injuries specifically to Kansas City, including what's happening now, because he wants them to see that this is something that's happening that happened in your lifetime. So that's why we're trying to revise and tweak our ordinance to make sure that it's clear in terms of some of the specifics of Kansas City. But yeah, and probably for every city, there's already a tremendous amount of research that's already been done in all of those areas.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Jefferson, just real quickly, I want to just, and not to, if it's too heady and too academic, then don't get into it, Mickey. What way are they trying to quantify the impact of, I think I heard you say Jim Crow, segregation, and the redlining and all those other things? So if it's too heady, you don't have to get into it, but I was just curious if there was a very clear way they will.
I will say this, that's going to be one of the roles of the commission. What we're going to try to do is have committees in our commission to deal with each one of those areas. And of course, the one of the tasks will be, to the extent possible, to try to quantify what that damage is. I'm not a statistician. You know, I'm actually a lawyer by profession. Actually, I'm a recovering lawyer, so. But I know that there are ways to quantify that. And like I said, there was one company that came in and did this for one of the local research organizations, and where they did that on the historical redlining, and they were able to quantify the difference between the property values in the Black community, the communities that were redlined, as well as versus the property communities, the property values in the other communities. They were also able to try to quantify in terms of the amount of wealth lost from not being able to develop home ownership, because, you know, there's a lot of wealth in home ownership. That's a lot of families' main source of wealth, and they were able to quantify that. So they can document a lot of that stuff, you know. But that's going to be one of the tasks of the commission, is to go and do that.
Okay.
And we got Mr.
Randy.
Wesley back.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right.
Technical
Something happened,
difficulties.
huh?
Something is wrong with my Wi-Fi.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Glad
well,
we
I'm
got
gonna turn
through
it
that.
over to Dr. Franklin. I'm gonna turn it back over to you then.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we were asking a question of you while you were down, and that was what institutions in New Orleans and in Louisiana. I'm not going to drop any names like Tulane, but what institutions could possibly be the object of a reparations demand on the basis of your understanding of how individuals and communities are impacted by what institutions did to African Americans, particularly before the end of Jim Crow?
That's a really wonderful question, and there's so many different ways that we could discuss, because as Mr. Dean pointed out in his own experience, we've had a lot of the same experiences here in New Orleans. I mean, I think about the fact of the federal highway going through Congo Square, you know, which was an African American neighborhood, destroying homes, destroying businesses, you know, and of course those decisions were made in connection with local officials. So it wasn't just the federal government doing that. We could talk about all kinds of housing discrimination that occurred in the city of New Orleans, just as it occurred in the Evanston context, that Blacks were pretty much segregated within the city and not allowed to purchase in certain neighborhoods. And we could talk about the discriminatory access to what otherwise would be considered public services, so that Black communities here in New Orleans have traditionally been underserved in terms of all kinds of public services, that whether we're talking about libraries, whether we're talking about the siting of public schools, whether we're talking about the siting of grocery stores. I mean, we have food deserts here in New Orleans. You know, in terms of educational opportunities as well, I think that, you know, I'm not an expert when it comes to local issues, because, you know, from my perspective, you know, these efforts, as important as they are, they get away from what I call sort of grand bargain reparations, the sort of federal reparations, because this entire structure was put in place and maintained in place because of federal support for segregation and racial discrimination. It wasn't just the locals making these decisions. It was the fact that the federal government allowed it. Even in terms of like access to food, there's been a lot of discrimination at both the local and federal level. So, you know, nutrition programs and food for poor folks have been distributed on a discriminatory basis. Access to recreational facilities as well. So I mean, it's so systematic and it's so institutional that you can look in almost any direction. I mean, in terms of environmental justice concerns. You know, I mean, there's a part
Gordon
of,
Plaza.
yeah, I mean, a part, there's a part of Louisiana that's referred to as Cancer Alley, right? But if you look at the people who have been mostly affected, it's predominantly African Americans. Right now, there's an issue of the destruction of African American burial grounds. That is also taken place here in Louisiana in ways that have not always been archived or noted, that these grounds have been desecrated. Other buildings have been put on top of those burial grounds, or they've been used for industrial purposes. So, you know, it's so widespread, it's so systematic, it's so institutional, and it's completely from top to bottom. So, you know, I think that anything that you could look at in other localities, there's some version of that that's also here in Louisiana and in New Orleans.
Yeah, and when we had our town meeting, one of the areas that we identified was support for the cultural bearers and the cultural institutions in New Orleans, and the disparity in the support of the cultural institutions and the cultural bearers. That is a major issue for New Orleans, and that we discussed, and we had in our when we had our reparations town hall meeting. That was one of the major issues that we addressed, which is really intrinsic to New Orleans, and that you have these musicians, these artists, you know, who have made the culture in New Orleans, the reason why people come to New Orleans, and there are great disparities in the amount of support. That is, they're the ones that are attracting the tourists, but they are not. They don't have housing, they don't have fair wages, they don't have, so for cultural bearers in New Orleans is a specific thing that we have identified that in Justice and Beyond as an area where we would want reparatory justice to intervene. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Valerie, so she's going to take us. She's going to take any last questions and give the announcements and allow for the announcements. Thank you for your participation in this program, Janae, Mickey Dean, and Professor Wesley. It has been really helpful. Taking a lot of notes, and we've got things to do, and I think that we can just begin by just seeing whether or not the council supported HR 40. Did the New Orleans City Council support the? So therefore, therefore they've gone on record in support of reparations if they've supported HR 40. So that's something that we can find out immediately. We can find out immediately about Mayor Cantrell and her relationship to Moore, because I think she let some of us know that she was a member of Moore, but someone says that she's not. But in any case, I'm gonna turn it over to Valerie because we have learned so much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with Dr. Franklin. We had learned so much tonight. We really appreciate you all sharing y'all knowledge and encouraging us and empowering us. We really thank you all for coming. But I want to turn it over to Miss Brooke. Miss Brooke, because I don't see any more questions. We thank you all for your comments and your questions. Now I'm gonna turn over to Miss Brooke. Miss Brooke gonna explain about the amendments. Thank you all. Give us around 15 more minutes. Thank you. You're on mute, Ms. Brooke.
Sorry.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much. This is a wonderful forum. I don't want to speak too long, and I want to tell you that I used a cheat sheet, which was anti-gravity, because I find that their responses and they seem to be really thorough. So the first constitutional amendment is on whether somebody needs to be a citizen of the United States to vote in our elections. And there are some states that where you don't have to be a citizen, but in New Orleans you do, and in Louisiana you do. So this is just a simple no, we don't need to make an amendment for this. It's simply, it is already done. You know, you have to prove that you're a citizen before you get to vote. So that's not a problem. The second one is a little more complicated, and that is a confirmation of gubernatorial appointed members of the state, requires the Senate confirmation of gubernatorially appointed members of the State Civil Service Commission. And if anybody knows more about this than I do, please jump in here, because it's basically saying that there are a few select people who are permitted to